Hello, everybody. Welcome to our IZD webinar. We're just going to give you a couple of minutes to start coming in while we wait for our other participants. Why don't you put where you're watching from in our chat box and tell us what country and what zoo or aquarium you're from. And we'll get started in just a couple of minutes' time. Okay, I can see lots of people from different parts of the world. Welcome, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Great to see you here again. So this is our 6th IZD webinar in the series. As a reminder, these webinars are help to you all to unpack the social change for conservation strategy. It was specifically created by the IZD board to provide support and training of how you can meet this new strategy. So today's webinar is all about Chapter 6. And the title of this chapter is Prioritising Conservation and Sustainability into Conservation Education. My name is Dr. Sarah Thomas, and I'm the Head of Conservation Advocacy and Engagement here at Auckland Zoo in New Zealand. So good morning from me, and I'll be your host and moderator for today's webinar. And thanks to Nettie, who's the IZD administrator, who's today's tech support. So today we've got 4 speakers, so it's a bumper session. We have Kerry Lammering and Emily Bowling from St. Louis Zoo in North America. We've got Helen Johnson from Zoos Victoria in Australia. And then Francis William Ruhaniwa, or Frank, from Uganda Wildlife Conservation Education Centre in Uganda. And joining us for the panel discussion is going to be Becky Nellis from the Columbus Zoo, and she's the IZD board rep for North America. So I can see we've got quite a few people joining. So just before we get on to our speakers, just going to do some housekeeping as always. So please be aware that this webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be posted on the IZD YouTube channel. So by staying and participating, you consent to being part of this recording. And as always, hello to all the viewers who are watching this from the IZD YouTube channel later. And as a note, this is our 6th webinar, and the other 5 are already on our YouTube channel, so have a look at those. As this is a webinar, all the viewers are on mute, but you can ask questions. So go to the chat box or the Q&A box and ask those questions. And if you've got a question for a specific presenter, then please put the name next to your question so we can get them to the right person. So to start us off, as always, we have some polls. So Nettie, we're going to start off with our first polls, if that's okay. If you want to share those with our viewers. For those of you that are watching later, you can't see this, so I'm just going to read them out. So the first, it's just checking where you're watching from and what level of IZD membership you have. So the first question asks to choose your IZD membership level, whether you're an institutional member, individual member, associate member, or not an IZD member. And also, where did you hear about the webinar? So was that social media? Was that email? Was that website? And so have a look through those questions and just check those boxes. And Nettie, once we've got a good response rate, we can share the results. Okay, so those watching live can see those results. So we've got 42% who are not IZD members. So welcome to you. Lovely to have new people watching. And the way that most people heard about it was through the IZD email. So you may know Nettie's name from those emails. So great to hear that we're having those communications. Nettie, do we have another poll before we get started, or is that it for today?
We have another one. I'll post it. It's about what stage you're at in implementing the strategy.
Oh, great. So poll number 2. This is just to really check in where you're at implementing the strategy. We're nearly a year in after that it's launched. It was launched in October 2020. So this question just says, you know, we want to know where you're at so we can really gauge these webinars to help and support you. So you've got some different options. So you've read the documents, but nothing else. You've watched previous chapter webinars and those were helpful. You have conversations with colleagues and how you might implement the strategy, or you're actually doing some of those implementing right now. So have a think about that and pop your answer into the poll. Great, so we can see the results, and 42% have watched previous chapter webinars and those are helpful. So this is great news. We've been doing these every month for the last 6 months, and we really hope that these webinars have been useful to you. So thanks, Nettie, for sharing those polls. And just before we get to our first speaker, we've done 6 webinars and we've just got another couple to do. So hopefully you can see this slide, which shows that where we're at Chapter 6, Prioritising Conservation Sustainability into Conservation Education. We're going to take a wee break in October because we have the International Conservation Education Conference that is a joint venture between IZAD and EASA. And then we have the last 2. So if you would like to speak about training and professional development, if you'd like to talk about evaluation and research, please do get in contact and we can pop you on the speaker sheet. And then just to highlight before we get to our 4 speakers, the recommendations for Chapter 6, these all connect to prioritising about how we talk about conservation and sustainability work, the work that zoos and aquariums really do, and it's at our core. And also, how can we make the complex and numerous conservation and sustainability issues relevant, easy to understand for our audiences? And how can we use different tactics like optimism, inspiration, motivation to inspire audiences to take action in their own lives? So it's a really important chapter for this strategy and a really important kind of focus for the work that zoos and aquariums do. And today we've got 4 fantastic speakers who are going to showcase some of that work. So without further ado, I'm going to go to our first speaker, who is Kerry Lammering. She's a conservation education liaison at the St. Louis Zoo. So hello to you, Kerry. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen and then hopefully over to you and you can share yours.
Thank you very much. And I'm very sorry, they just started some loud equipment right outside my office. So hopefully you can hear me okay. Awesome. Thank you very much for having me as a presenter. I'm very excited to share with you. So what I'm going to be talking about is how we are able to assist an ongoing research project while at the same time offering authentic education, STEM education experiences to our community. So as mentioned, we are located here in the middle of the United States in St. Louis, Missouri. We have a little team called the Institute for Conservation Medicine. It was developed here at our zoo about 12 years ago. And it was a very small team of only the director, Dr. Sharon Dean, who is an epidemiologist and a wildlife vet, and a part-time technician. Both of them wanted to do a project that talked about ecosystem health, animal health, and allowed people to be active participants in the project. So they were both huge turtle enthusiasts, and we are in the middle of the turtle crises, both globally and locally. We have turtle declines as well. So to give you a background story of how they started, Dr. Dean, when she moved to St. Louis, our zoo is located in an urban park. So we're right here in the middle of this, or on the side of this urban park. So she lives nearby. And a neighbor knew that she was a wildlife vet and said, oh my goodness, you need to come over and see this turtle. So she had a box turtle, which are native. They're actually our state reptile and very clearly terrestrial. She said, I found this in my backyard and we went on vacation. So again, we're here in the middle of the United States. She took the turtle to Florida and released it on the beach. And she said the turtle didn't seem very happy. So then we drove the turtle back up here to St. Louis, and they've been keeping it in their bathtub. So Dr. Deem said, oh my goodness, the people of Missouri love turtles, but they know nothing about them. And the more they did research, our box turtle populations are currently declining, but very little research had been done into their movements, so we're not aware of how much space they need. And also we know that there are some infectious diseases affecting turtle populations. So again, in the United States, in the eastern portion of the United States, a major disease called Ranavirus had been impacting turtle populations. And it had been documented in Illinois, but to date, it had not been documented in Missouri. And given that we're right on the border, it would make sense that it's here. It just wasn't being studied. So they figured we have a project. So they radio tagged box turtles in both an urban site and a rural site. So our rural site is about 20 minutes outside of the city. And the urban site is right here in Forest Park, which happens to be the largest urban park in the United States. And our zoo is located in it. So we have turtles at any given time, anywhere from 5 to 10 turtles radio tagged in this urban park. So you can see all of this area here means that we've got community that we can involve in the project very easily. So what we do is we have radio tags on the turtles, we weigh them, we take swabs of their mouth and their cloaca. We track them once a week or once every other week throughout the year. And as I mentioned, the team is really small. So when the team started this project 10 years ago, it was still only one full-time person and one part-time person. And they wanted to also do outreach, which there's no way you can do outreach and research when you're 1.5 people. So our education department paired educators with animal areas to help them with education. I happen to be paired with this team. So they let me shadow and learn how to do the field work. And then we are inviting school groups and adults and families to come do turtle safaris with us. And that counts for that turtle's visit, either that weekly visit or that every other week visit. And the people take the information for us. And so they get to do the tracking and the visual observations, which increases empathy beyond anything I would have ever imagined and creates these turtle enthusiasts. The great thing about this project, again, because our department, even though our zoo is huge, this department was really small. This project was all funded by grant. So we didn't have the funds to purchase the radio antennas and the tags, and thankfully grants have covered all of that for us. We now get a little bit of money to help supplement for transportation costs, but previous to that, grants also covered that for us to pay for the school buses to bring kids out. After we have taken them turtle tracking, and everybody falls in love with the turtle because you got to, because they're so cute. People want to help. And so another thing that we know is that roadways are a huge issue for turtles. That's local and global. And we want to be able to go to our local Department of Transportation and ask for help with turtle crossings. But the problem is we need to know where the hot spots are. And so we ask our guests to participate in the Turtle Road Watch project, which is on iNaturalist, which is a community science, open access, free platform that people can use, and they can use it just on their mobile phone. And these are the dots that we have collected so far. So to kind of show you, we are getting some information on where those hot spots are. And then we can, when we get a little bit more data, we'll be able to go to our Department of Transportation and ask for help making road crossings for turtles. In a nutshell, in a very quick overview, that is our project and how we were able to inspire our community to help and do it cheaply and easily and the most effective way possible. There's my email address and the website where you can get more information about that project.
Great, thank you so much, Kerry. And you did really well with that extra noise coming from your office. If you want to just post your email and that link to the website in the chat box, that's really helpful for our viewers. Thank you. And now we're going to move quickly from St. Louis to the Southern Hemisphere, to Australia, and over to Helen Johnson. Helen is the Community Conservation Campaigner at Zoos Victoria, Australia. And good morning to you, Helen, and thank you so much. It is very early in Australia, and we're delighted that you can join us. So over to you, Helen.
Thank you very much. I'll just share my screen. Hi, everyone. Is that working, Sarah?
Yeah, perfect.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me today. Before I start, I want to acknowledge that I am speaking to you today from Wadawurrung country, and I pay my sincere respects to their elders and all Aboriginal elders, past, present, and emerging. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the When Balloons Fly, Seabirds Die campaign, and in particular, how community conservation can influence real-world policy change. So you might be aware of the When Balloons Fly, Seabirds Die program. You may have heard about it before. Up here on the right, there's an IZE journal article written by some colleagues of mine and published in the 2018 journal. And my colleague Leanne Wilson also spoke about the program in 2020 at the IZE conference. So I'm just going to briefly run over it. The When Balloons Fly, Seabirds Die campaign was launched in 2017, and it inspires visitors of the zoo and members of the community to blow bubbles instead of use balloons at outdoor events. And this was amid concerns that balloons pose a very, very strong risk to wildlife. And since the launch of the When Balloons Fly program, some of these papers have been published which really demonstrate that. So balloons are one of the top 3 most disproportionately lethal items ingested by marine fauna. And they're particularly lethal to seabirds. And we can see from the picture down the bottom here, there's several parts of the balloon that are a problem. So it's the soft latex or plastic that makes the balloon that's a real problem. But then there's also the hard plastic clips that are used to tie a balloon. And then of course, it's not shown here, but there's a ribbon or a string often attached to a balloon, which could be an entanglement risk as well. So there's lots of different parts, and they're a very bad item for an animal to ingest, get entangled in, or anything like that. So since the campaign launched in 2017, over 230,000 people, as well as hundreds of schools, have made a public pledge to blow bubbles rather than use balloons at outdoor events. And on the top right-hand side, you can see one of our installations at Melbourne Zoo, where visitors can come along and add their name to the board and make that public pledge in front of others, which is a very cost-effective way to build a social movement and momentum within the community. Hundreds of organisations, including local businesses, community groups and councils, have also joined in and said that they will cease to use balloons outdoors, which is a fantastic commitment from them as well. So these types of public commitments and pledges can have really long-term behavioural change impacts. So this study published by Mellish and colleagues in 2019 showed that 6 months after exposure to our When Balloons Fly installations at Melbourne Zoo, 6 months later, two-thirds of the follow-up sample reported to have changed their behaviour regarding balloons while hosting or attending an outdoor event. So I just want to stress that these fairly cost-effective, cheap ways for a zoo to create a public movement and a social movement can have really long-term impacts when we're talking about conservation. So earlier this year, I was involved in a Zoos Victoria fellowship, and part of my job was to look at the current litter data collected by different groups around Victoria, including our partners Phillip Island Nature Parks. And I was looking particularly for the current balloon litter prevalence compared to other litter. And so far at the moment, we have found that in the last couple of years, balloon litter does appear to be decreasing, which is really exciting news for our local area, potentially a testament to our campaign. However, it's probably a little too early to say, and we'll continue to look at the litter data for years to come, because of course, balloons can exist in the environment for a long time. It's very difficult to know how far they've flown from, where they've come from, and how they're getting to our shorelines. So we'll continue to look at that, but very exciting to see that it does appear to be decreasing. Another part of my job during the fellowship was to look at who's still releasing balloons. And we had some information given to the zoo that funeral companies in particular were still releasing balloons at their services. So I took it on to contact as many as I could. I ended up with a sample size of 77 funeral companies that I contacted. And I asked the simple question, do you facilitate balloon release for your clients? I found that 84% were still facilitating balloon release to some extent. And what that means is they will either source the balloons directly for their client, or they would allow their client to source balloons and then release them at the service themselves. So strikingly high numbers were still facilitating this behaviour. Now the rates of their balloon requests ranged from quite rare, so a couple of times a year, to several times a month. And the number of balloons ranged anywhere between a small handful, so the immediate family of the person who passed away, or up to requests of about 150 balloons per release. If we think about one balloon can break up into many, many pieces, and each one of those pieces could be lethal to wildlife, then that's a huge amount of balloons to be releasing in one go. Interestingly, I also found that 18% of those who release balloons believe genuinely that they're sourcing biodegradable ones. And this is not their fault at all. There is a lot of advertising out there here in Australia from suppliers and retailers that their balloons are biodegradable. And this is something I'll touch on in a slide or two and talk to you again about. So earlier, I think it was a couple of years ago, our team became informed that there would be a change in our Victorian Environmental Protection Act, and there's going to be a shift towards preventing environmental issues rather than a reactionary approach. Now, this is the first sort of upgrade or overhaul of the Act since the 1970s. So our team decided this was a fantastic opportunity to leverage the support we had gained from the community who don't want to use balloons outdoors anymore, and contact the Environmental Protection Agency and request that balloons are included in the new Act as litter. And amazingly, they succeeded. They did a fantastic job, and on July 1st, 2021, balloon release was banned in Victoria. It's classed as littering and comes with fairly substantial fines. So this is obviously a massive win for our wildlife. We've been celebrating this with all of those who made the pledges and also communicating it to those who we know were releasing balloons as well. And it also really demonstrates how a simple pledge system, social movement can drive huge policy change. If you'd like to, I might even post this in the chat afterwards. This is the EPA website and their information on balloons. So I'm going to finish up by telling you where we're going next. A little while ago, Zoos Victoria and the City of Hobart funded a study conducted by the University of Tasmania, which has proven that latex balloons are not biodegradable. And so we are going to continue to push for accurate labelling of balloons in our state. I would encourage everyone to also have a look at what's being advertised around your area and get in touch with the relevant parties there. Yeah, watch this space. We'll continue to push for that accurate labelling. We can see here this picture on the right-hand side. This balloon was actually in industrial compost for 3.5 months as part of the study listed there, and it has hardly changed whatsoever. So Gilmore and Labors found that latex balloons do not meaningfully degrade, not only in compost, but in fresh or salt water. Now, this study was mentioned briefly on the first slide. This is a review by Roman and colleagues published in 2020, and it essentially found that flexible plastic in particular is responsible for the highest proportion of marine megafauna deaths due to ingestion. Megafauna here applies to cetaceans, sea turtles, seabirds, and pinnipeds, so the seals. 3 classes of marine debris were disproportionately lethal when ingested, and I'll describe what they are. So film-like plastic in particular is a real problem. This includes things like cling wrap, food packaging, plastic bags, all the way up to agricultural sheeting like used in greenhouses and so on. We've then got balloons and latex including gloves, also other forms of rubber. And then of course we have fishing debris, fishing rope, fishing line, netting and hooks are the main culprits here. So in terms of moving forward with our next plastics campaign, we're going to really assess the evidence. Here down the bottom are some of the particular items that are recommended by the authors of this review to regulate, reduce and replace. So plastic bags, plastic packaging, plastic sheets, fishing debris and balloons. So we're going to continue winding down our balloons campaign from now and starting to move forward with our next community focus campaign on a particular item yet to be determined. I highly encourage you guys, if you're interested in designing some sort of marine plastic pollution education focus for your zoo, check out that review down the bottom there by Roman, but also here are some of the other references if you're interested. And my email is also there and the zoo website. Please get in touch if you have any questions or would like to start up a discussion about your particular campaigns or community education programs. We're always really happy to share ideas and I'd love to hear yours. So thank you very much for having me again, and I'll pass back to you, Sarah.
Great, thank you so much, Helen. Always a pleasure to hear about Zoos Victoria's great work. We're going to move swiftly on, moving from Australia down to Uganda. Helen, you might want to stop sharing your screen. We can just see your screen still. Perfect. So from Australia to Uganda, our next speaker is Francis William Ruhaniwa. Frank is the Senior Education Officer from the Uganda Wildlife Conservation Education Centre in Uganda. I can see from the chat box we've got lots of viewers from Uganda, so hello to you all. Lovely to have you with us. And over to you, Frank, if you want to share your screen.
Okay, so Thomas, thank you so much.
We can see your screen, but you might need to put it on. That's perfect. Looks great now.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Francis William Ruhaniwa from Uganda Wildlife Conservation Education Center. We are in Uganda, Africa. Our facility has about 59 species of wildlife, wild animals, and about 116 individual animals. So I'm happy to be part of this was a strategy, and I'm going to be presenting about how my facility is prioritizing conservation and sustainability. To begin with our approach, we need to understand what conservation education really is. And we are looking at about 3 layers. The first layer is knowledge. What kind of information are we sharing with our audience? Then skills and values, the second layer. The third layer is attitudes, emotions, and behavior. So if we are able to cover the 3 layers, then we can be able to tap into sustainable use of resources. And that is, in a nutshell, what we mean with conservation education. I'm going to tackle just 3 of our programs. We've got many programs, but I'm going to talk about 3. That is waste management. We've got a wetland conservation program and ecotourism promotion. And then lastly, we shall look at how we are supporting the school curriculum. So in our waste management program, we embrace the 5 areas of waste management. That is refuse. If you look right here, as you enter our facility, we've got a very big signage that no single-use plastics beyond this point. So as you enter, we do not accept the single-use plastics. So we are able to reduce the plastics that are coming into the facility. But at the same time, we are creating awareness about this. As you can see in this picture, this is one of the African elemented turtle, which was rescued from a community, one of our mandates. So you can see right here, it was trapped in a polythene bag, polythene paper. And as it grew, this constricted its shell. So we are able to educate the people about the impact of the littering waste. If we don't manage our waste very well, it's going to impact on our biodiversity. But also the fact that we can repurpose, we can reuse, we can recycle this waste. So we've established on-site waste management demonstration gardens, but that is for basically demonstrating to the community that is here that the plastic can actually be used for something good. Then we also conduct community cleanups. We go in the community, say in a trading center, and we do a cleanup with the community members. This they have really embraced. And the other part is that the waste can actually be used for making briquettes. So in this picture, you're seeing community members who are being trained on making briquettes. Why we tackle the briquette issue? Because 98% of people in Uganda, they use wood fuel as a source of energy. Now this impacts on the plant resources, the deforestation, and of course habitat loss. So if we've got alternative energies and these are tapping into waste, in that way we are contributing to biodiversity conservation. So this waste can also be used for backyard gardening in the community. We've established over 30 backyard gardens in communities that we've worked in. We are also skilling communities on how to manage the waste, but also in terms of entrepreneurship. If we make the briquettes, can we be able to market them? So we've trained people in livelihood and community entrepreneurship programs. Now, the third element that I really want to focus on is our program on wetland conservation and ecotourism promotion. Our approach has been to use the magic bullet that is conservation education. We believe that by carrying out conservation education, we are able to impact on the mindset of people. So we've trained tour guides in this community. The community I'm talking about is part of a Ramsar site, a wetland of economic importance called Akanada. It is part of Mawanga Ramsar site. So we've trained over 50 guides since I joined work. Now these tour guides have been able to be our eyes on in the community. And the most recent fruit of this is that in this picture you see the man being arrested. This man had actually captured a shooting for trade, possibly for illegal trade. So the community members know the value of what they have. Once they appreciate the value of what they have, then they become custodians of their own biodiversity. In this other picture, you see, it's not a barbecue, but actually contrabands of bushmeat that we captured from the community. We've circled here, this is a velvet monkey, this is a monitor lizard, and here we have an otter. So what happened is poachers came into this wetland and they ravaged the place. They captured monkeys, they captured monitor lizards, possibly for bushmeat trade. And in 2 weeks, they had captured a lot of wildlife. And they are roasting it possibly for trade. So our eyes on, the guys who came were able to call us. And only by the time we came, these guys are taken off. So we are able to capture this. But if we didn't have these guys, we are trained, you can imagine the impact. So we've done an inventory of the biodiversity in this place. The local treasures, the community now appreciate the importance of this wetland. We've established trails for birding and birding excursions for more ecotourism. And we've also used a stakeholder engagement to establish a community-based organization that is managing the site. And we've actually been able to make for them a management plan. Our approach is to have the community have a buy-in, and we are having more stakeholder engagement so that all stakeholders are brought on board to conserve the biodiversity. So those are the three, which, as you can see, are in line with what the previous panels have talked about, Helen and Kerry. The last one is supporting the school curriculum. What we've done here is we've got a program that is called Zoo School. So the learners come to the zoo to have hands-on experience outside the school. They connect with the animals that we have here. They touch the animals. We have high impact nature experiences, running from turning to the animals, drawing pictures of the animals, self-guided tours with our guide. Now the idea is that these young people should be able to develop a culture of conservation. Once they have this culture of conservation, because these are the custodians of our biodiversity. So if we have a culture in these young people, then we are sure that our biodiversity is safe. We have thematic guided tours, as you can see in this picture. This is field work. So they are able to do what is taught in class practically here in the zoo. So the facility becomes a hands-on experience. The learners are out in nature having fun, but also learning very abstract content, but in a fun way, in a wild place. And the final segment is that we're producing materials that are going to support the school curriculum. This particular book is for secondary schools, but we are going to move on to primary schools. I'm very grateful to the government of Uganda supported us to have this production. We have partnership with Zoos Victoria. They have also supported us. And of course, IZE, WZACES, you've supported all our programs. Dr. Sarah Thomas, thank you so much for this strategy. And I want to say thank you so much for listening to me. Here is my email and my WhatsApp. And I will leave you with a quote that education is not the learning of facts, but the training of the mind to think, as stated by Albert Einstein. Let's train our audience as educators as we unpack the strategy to think out of the box for the conservation actions that they can undertake. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Frank. That's a brilliant presentation. Lovely to hear all about the work that you're doing. So we're going to move on to our last speaker. So from Uganda back up to North America, to St. Louis. Our final speaker is Emily Bowling is a conservation liaison at the St. Louis Zoo. So over to you, Emily.
I wanted to make sure I was unmuted. That would help doing a presentation. So thank you so much for the opportunity to tell just a very short piece of a very long story. So I'm going to go as quickly as I can, and I am always happy to chat more about this. So my presentation is all about the St. Louis Zoo's journey with moving towards using sustainable palm oil and also teaching about sustainable palm oil. So our journey started in 2014. I will say with my job, I was put from being an outreach instructor to very suddenly being someone who's in charge of teaching and learning about primates in particular. And after about 3 months, the zoological manager of primates came back from the orangutan SSP conference and said, palm oil is a huge issue. Orangutans are going extinct. We need to do something to help, and you're going to help me. And at the time, I didn't know much about it. It seemed so complex. I was very discouraged about doing anything, almost paralyzed by what to do about the palm oil crisis. So I dove in because I really wasn't given much of a choice, but it ended up being an amazing opportunity, and sitting down and framing it as opportunities and not barriers was really important for us in St. Louis. I went to quite a few meetings at AZA where I felt like a little second grader at the table with a bunch of adults, not knowing where we were at, feeling like I was far behind on this journey than other people, and learned very quickly that everyone there was there to help each other, to communicate to each other, to help me. I have not run into anybody with the palm oil stuff in education that has not been incredibly helpful. Cheyenne Mountain Zoo, Zoos Victoria, San Diego Zoo, Oregon Zoo, all of them have all been so helpful to me. So one of the things that we did is, okay, this is a huge global thing. The production is happening halfway across the world, and we are here in the middle of our country where there's a lot of agriculture that happens where we're at. It's all corn and soybeans. So we did have that connection. So we sat down and kind of thought about how do we connect our specific audience and our specific community to this crisis. Because what works in California does not work in Missouri. We are a very large country and have different attitudes and values depending on where we are in the country as well. So it all came back to the animals. It always does. So these are all animals that we have in our care at the St. Louis Zoo that are affected by the palm oil crisis. We decided to focus on all of these animals, not just orangutans. And we established a palm oil sustainability task force. We asked people from each of these animal areas, usually zookeepers, people from our education department, people from our purchasing department. We had someone from events that joined. Anybody that had a department who wanted to join could bring a representative to the table, and it was all volunteer basis. And it's amazing when you put out the call, how many people wanted to help. We actually had too many people, so that's why we made it a task force and not a committee. So our three main goals, we learned very quickly was that we really needed to get our own house in order with sustainable palm oil. Not many people knew it was even a thing. People don't know it's an ingredient in your food, even though it's in half of everything you consume. So like knowledge was kind of the first step. Where are we at? Where do we need to go? And then coming up with a way to connect it to Missouri. So we don't grow palm oil, but we use a lot of it. So that is one of the connections. We have control over that more than some other environmental crises that are happening far away with other issues. So our three main goals were, we tried to make them reasonable for us, things that we knew we could do, and things that we were okay to change if we needed to. So the biggest thing that helped us get where we are is giving ourselves permission to change things when we learned new information. And that got us stuck for about 2 years of we have to do it this way. We were learning more information and not changing our ways. And so being able to be flexible was really important. So our main goals were to join the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil, because that is the kind of biggest organization working towards palm oil sustainability. It does have its issues, and being part of it means that we can help work towards getting them to do more sustainable things. So we felt that was very important. We actually accomplished that in 2019, and I highly recommend doing it if you haven't done so already, and I'm happy to chat about the process. We also decided we really needed to make sure we had at least 75% of everything we had on grounds and we were selling or using was sustainable as well. We managed to actually do an inventory, and most of the things we were using were RSPO products anyway, which was great. And we did achieve that goal as well. We really want to be a leader in educating the public about how palm oil production and consumption is affecting animals, their wild habitats, and the people who live there and work there as well. So that is my next slide. We'll talk a little bit more about how we're doing that. And then just ultimately have consumers support the RSPO's efforts, making sure that they are pushing companies to use sustainable palm oil whenever possible. And when people don't know it's a problem, you have quite a bit of ways to go to getting them to do that. So we started with educating all of our staff. So giving everybody enough information so they feel confident about answering questions about palm oil. We did it with our volunteers as well. And then we eventually really ramped up our public education once we felt our staff and our volunteers were comfortable with doing this. And it was everyone at the zoo. So there's people in our membership department that go out and hang out by our sun bears and tell people about palm oil because they're passionate about it. And everybody who works at our zoo is there because they love animals and want to save animals. So giving someone something to do, even if they're not working in education or working in an animal area, was really a cool byproduct of this campaign. One of our other best champions of this is some of our teen volunteers. They love to get out there and talk about sustainable palm oil. We have signage at all of the animals that I had on the other slide. There's signs talking about palm oil. We have signs at events. We have people at events talking about it. We have found that having a person at a table is the best. Having just an ability to have a conversation is the easiest way to tackle this. And it was a lot of trial and error to get there. So my best advice for everyone here is the advice that I got a few years back, which is do not let great get in the way of good. So you don't have to be perfect at this. You are going to stumble. We've stumbled 1,000 times, and getting back up and still going, tweaking your messaging until it works for your community. So I actually have that on a Post-it at my desk still. Don't let great get in the way of good. And I'm here and happy to help. If you just need someone to cheer you on, I can do that for you. If you want any of the information that I have already compiled for palm oil, any of our signs, any of our activities, any of that, I am happy to help.
Great, thank you so much, Emily. And great to know that you're happy to share the resources that you have made at St. Louis Zoo. So we're just going to have our panel session now for the last kind of 15 minutes. You can see all our speakers turning their video cameras on, which is great. While we're thinking about questions to ask our speakers, and please do pop that in the chat box. I can see we've got a couple of questions in our Q&A box. We'll get to those in a moment. While we're thinking of questions, I'm going to introduce our guest panelist, who is Becky Nellis. Becky is the Director of Curriculum and Partnerships at the Columbus Zoo and Aquarium and the Wiles. Hello to you, Becky. She also serves on the IZE board as a North American representative. So I guess, do you want to introduce yourself, but also talk to us about what this new conservation education strategy means to you, given your kind of career in zoos and aquariums?
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah. It's such a pleasure to be here with everyone today. I am so excited about this strategy because I really believe that it allows zoos to have a framework to kind of get started from, right? So it has opened up the opportunity for our zoo to be able to really talk about some of these issues in depth in ways that we might not have in the past. And specifically, I think this chapter that we're talking about today has some really amazing implications for zoos and aquariums. I know here in North America, what I've really seen is this shift from, our zoo does great work and let us tell you about what we're doing, to a more inclusive approach that really encourages our communities to be a part of that conservation work. And so I think in listening to all these speakers today, that's the thing that really stands out to me, is that we are looking for ways to really bring in our communities and get them excited about the work we're doing and get them to have that buy-in and passion that we all feel every day. And so I'm so excited to be here and be a part of this strategy. And I thank you, Sarah, for hosting these webinars. I think they've been an amazing asset to zoos all across the world.
Great, thanks, Becky. So we're going to go over to our chat box. We're going to start with you, Helen, with the first question. So this is coming from Hero. Hi, Hero. Lovely to see your name on our chat. He says, great presentation, Helen. You mentioned that flying balloons is now banned in Victoria. Would you tell us about other places in Australia? Are you planning to try and get that legislation across the whole of the country?
So I think that will be beyond our scope, but we would definitely encourage or be willing to chat to zoos around Australia and help them to push for that change in their own states. I know that some of our other states have banned balloons. Queensland or the Sunshine Coast have banned balloon release. New South Wales, you can release up to 20 balloons, but after that it's a cutoff, which I find quite absurd, really, if you think of the damage even 20 balloons or 20 individuals releasing 20 balloons could do. So I don't know about every single state off the top of my head.
We'll stick with you, because I know that in your presentation there was a lot of evaluation and research that went into this project, which obviously helped the policy change. So by doing this evaluation of your programs, like, what were the results? How did that help you kind of really drive that social change that you talked about?
Yeah, well, we could show when we approached the EPA or the agency that this particular social movement, the pledges people were making, this was long-standing beliefs. This was change. This wasn't just someone coming to the zoo, making their pledge and forgetting about it. We were able to show with that published study by Mellish and colleagues, some of my colleagues at the zoo, that this behaviour change was real. We also gathered the support from other government agencies around Victoria. So when approaching the EPA, we essentially all worked together and said, hey, we will celebrate this. We will have our zoo community on board to celebrate this, our members, our visitors, everyone, and we're all behind you. And essentially, in a way, a lot of these agencies were excited by it. We're actually, and even some of the funeral companies I spoke to, when we actually let them know the change, were relieved. So I think it's basically just, we're on the precipice of this change, and I would highly encourage everyone around in your zoos around the world to investigate this and what you can do as well for really high impact on helping to conserve those particular species I mentioned.
Great, thank you so much, Helen. We'll move over to you, Frank, next for a question. You actually mentioned in your chat box making the link between in situ and ex situ conservation is key. Do you want to just tell us a bit more about that and what approach you use at your centre?
Thank you so much, Thomas. If the zoos are to remain relevant in conservation, there should be a very strong link between the ex situ and in situ conservation efforts. So what we're doing here is that we've got a mandate, a legal mandate to rescue wildlife that is caught in conflict. We bring it here at work, we rehabilitate the wildlife. Then if it is in good condition, we can take it back to the community. We release the wildlife. So we are able to connect the in situ with ex situ. Where the animals are under our care, that is ex situ conservation, we can undertake active breeding. We are breeding ostriches, we are breeding the cats, we are breeding birds. So this breeding, we are able now to release some of this back into the wild. If you look at what I've just presented about the wetland conservation, if we educate the community members from our facility, that is an ex situ conservation facility really, these community members are our eyes on in the in situ setting, in the wetland itself. So they become custodians and they're able to help us conserve the biodiversity, the ecosystem at that level, protecting the species, protecting the ecosystem. That beautiful wetland that is actually in my background is home to many endangered birds. The shoebill stork, the gray-crowned crane are national birds. Now, if we do not protect these wetlands, in fact, we've lost from 15% land cover in 2014 to about 9%. So the wetlands are declining. And recently we had the lake, the biggest lake here in Africa, Lake Victoria. It went in protest. The water levels went up. And all these people who are in the wetlands were affected. Hotels, the beach lines were washed away. Now, if we do not conserve the wetlands, people are seeing the consequences that happen now. So we need to have this link really as ex situ facilities to connect our in situ, ex situ work to in situ conservation. Yes, thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Frank. That's really clear. We'll move over to you, Emily and Kerry, from both from St. Lucie, so we may have like a joint answer from you both. I'm interested in thinking about when we say prioritizing conservation sustainability, it's not always that easy. And so, Emily, you talked about supporting and training your staff and volunteers to understand palm oil, which is a really complex thing to get a grip for our audiences. So any top tips for our viewers about how to make really complex conservation and sustainability issues relevant for our staff, our volunteers, and for our audiences?
So with us, it was a little bit of trial and error, figuring out what the sweet spot was for not enough information to have people feel confident and too much information where they feel overwhelmed. So we actually made our training an online training so people can take it at their own pace and as opposed to an in-person training. So that actually was more effective for some reason than just doing trainings on their own with us. The other thing that I think people felt was helpful is having with the task force, there was one person in every department that was considered the expert on palm oil. And so there was someone near you at all times to help if you found a question that you didn't have an answer to. I still to this day have people who just give my email to folks if they're feeling like they don't have a good grip on the questions. And people do actually email me. So it's just having all of those points of contact and a real community around the cause, which people jump to tenfold more than I thought they would, which is great.
Great. And from you, Kerry, obviously your project involves wide ranges of the community. What kind of learnings did you have during your kind of process to get where you are now?
As I mentioned, the team that I work with allowed me to shadow them for a while, so I got comfortable with doing the field work because I am not a field biologist by training. So that made me feel really comfortable. And then not only have we involved the community, but also our staff. So we have had the great opportunity of having Jenny Gray from Zoo Victoria's, and also I think it's Elaine, is her name, Bumpus from Houston Zoo. talk about infusing conservation at your zoo. And this is such an easy project because most of our field work happens, you know, far away and you can't get the community involved. And this is so close. It's in our backyard and we still use all the same equipment that you would use in a broad program. So it's been a great way to get the community, both just our staff and our St. Louis community involved. So that's been really great. And we use the inspiration from those other zoos to get it infused in our own zoo community.
Great, thank you. So we're nearly at the end of our webinar, but Becky, I thought if we could just come to you for one last kind of question, and other speakers can comment if they want to, but a lot of our viewers are maybe at the start of their journey thinking about how to integrate conservation and sustainability into their conservation education programs. And so I guess, do you have any top tips, or, you know, thinking about somebody who might be at the start of their journey, what kind of ways might they get into thinking about that, integrating that prioritization of conservation and sustainability into our educational work?
So here in Columbus, I can speak to kind of our process. Several years ago, we really made that a priority in our team. We said, you know what? The reason we are here is because we want to help to protect wildlife and wild places. That's our goal. So, so while yes, there were other things that maybe our visitors were looking for in a visit to the zoo, we really kind of said, you know what, we're going to prioritize what we feel needs to come out of this visit. And so we really started thinking intentionally about our programming and saying, okay, how can we integrate those conservation moments into our programs? And sometimes they could be small things, you know, we did things like our summer camps. We started saying, you know what, when you bring your lunch, we're going to actually have a conversation about how you can bring reusable items instead of bringing a Ziploc baggie. How can you compost? How could you do that at home? And we started having more of those pieces integrated in small ways, and then over time took on bigger pieces. So now we do things like we have an event here that's an annual event called the Teen Eco Summit that really focuses on encouraging schools to come out and create sustainability plans for their school. And it's taken on a much more community level piece of that conservation work. But it took us kind of taking those smaller steps and developing those relationships with the community for us to be able to then move on to these bigger projects.
Great, thanks, Becky. So yeah, having those early conversations, really making that intentional commitment to start thinking about conservation and sustainability. And, you know, you're right that we are a community. We've all talked about kind of asking questions and getting help from other people. You've all shared your email address with our viewers, so you'll hopefully get some kind of connections from this. Thank you so much for all our speakers and our panelists. It has been an absolute delight to hear your stories, to hear all the great things that you're doing at your zoo. So thank you from myself and our viewers. Just before we finish, we've got a poll just to check in how we're doing with these IZE webinars. So Nettie, if you want to share that poll. For those that are watching later, you can't see this, but it's just 3 questions which ask, how valuable did you find this webinar? How would you like to see, what would you like to see in the future webinars about the strategy? So do you want more case studies? Do you want more explanation, more Q&A at the end? And so it's just really helpful for us to do a bit of evaluation to check in how we're doing to make sure that we get it right. So Nitty, once we've got the responses, we can share those. Great. So for those watching live, you can see that 47% found this extremely valuable, and that is the result of our brilliant speakers. Thanks again for all the great stuff that you've shared today. And we got it right, so keep the same mix with this webinar. So brilliant news. We'll be taking a break for a month because in October we have the IZE EASA Education Conference. But look for us again in early November for Chapter 7, which is all about training and professional development. So thanks for watching. Thanks to our speakers and panelists, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.